The first generation Starlink Mobile constellation was the first ever global direct-to-cell constellation capable of providing text and light data services nearly everywhere in the world, including video calls like we just saw. The second generation constellation, which we'll tell you about here.
March 2026. Gwynne Shotwell, the president of SpaceX, walks onto the stage to explain how satellites can connect directly to ordinary smartphones anywhere on Earth. This is not a rocket launch event and not a Starship live stream. It is the biggest clue about SpaceX's long-term future that may have come from a presentation until now.
We were founded 24 years ago with the one primary goal, and that was to build rockets and spaceships that would take us to live on other planets. And 24 years ago, that seemed really crazy, but today it doesn't seem that crazy. So you can't go live on the moon and Mars without connectivity. So certainly we want to work on connected solutions for there. Unfortunately, there are still almost a third of the people here on planet Earth that remain either unconnected or incredibly underserved. And that's why we started Starlink. We started flying in 2020. We have a giant constellation of satellites that serve humans here on Earth. And connectivity is not just about watching movies, although it's a great way to wind down, but those that are unconnected, once they are connected, have access to banking, better health care, education online, and it's an incredible technology for emergency services. It can also help save lives.
So what is Starlink? Starlink is the world's largest and most advanced satellite constellation. We're now operating nearly 10,000 satellites in low Earth orbit, providing hundreds of terabits of capacity for broadband services nearly everywhere in the world. Starlink is enabled with innovations like our advanced phased arrays, efficient use of spectrum, and our highly performant lasers that create a mesh of connectivity that literally encircles the globe. In the 5 years since we've been offering Starlink service, we've connected millions of people with highly reliable, high-performing connectivity. And we just actually crossed 10 million subscribers. But we're not stopping there. In 2024, we began launching our direct-to-cell constellation, which as of today, we're calling Starlink Mobile. The goal of Starlink Mobile is to connect to regular unmodified cell phones everywhere in the world. At the time that we started the direct-to-cell program in 2024, 20% of the land area and 20% of the land area in the US and 90% of the Earth's surface was uncovered by terrestrial mobile connectivity. Starlink Mobile fills in those gaps. Now, after 18 months, we fully deployed the first generation Starlink Mobile constellation consisting of 650 satellites. And we are now operating across 5 continents and are the largest 4G coverage provider by geographic area in the world. We've actually connected over 16 million unique users across the constellation and are connecting 10 million active users on a monthly basis. We expect that number to exceed 25 million by the end of 2026. The Starlink Mobile constellation works by connecting over lasers to the broader Starlink constellation, which means we can connect to devices wherever they are in the world. The constellation flies lower than any other satellite constellation at 350 kilometers. That's to optimize the link from the satellite to the user device, as well as for space safety. Back in 2024, when we started, we launched the first satellite. A few days later, the Starlink team was connecting over the satellite and texting using unmodified cell phones. A few months later, we had demonstrated video calls.
So watching movies is great, but this capability can provide life-saving connectivity. Last year in Los Angeles was devastated by wildfires. Starlink worked along with our mobile network operators to activate our direct-to-cell capability, Starlink Mobile, and over 400,000 people connected in that terrible time. We sent over 250,000 SMS messages and over 150 wireless emergency alerts. So this technology is not just for reaching our mobile apps and our videos, but it is also necessary for a great enhancement for life-saving capabilities. We served the people of Japan after the Kamchatka earthquake in late July, and again with the Amori earthquake in December. Think about land-based, terrestrial-based connectivity often is the first hit when there is a disaster. That's why the satellite-based capability is a great augmentation for day-to-day, but a critical element of emergency services. There's over 4.4 million people who have connected to Starlink Mobile during emergencies and disasters. So we've already enabled wireless emergency, just chatted about that, in the US, Canada, and Japan with support of our partner operators. We are just starting to leverage our broader 2 gigahertz spectrum for emergency services and emergency alerts in Europe. I think it's critically important here in Europe because you're so well connected terrestrially. You have very few white zones compared to the United States. We are full of white zones in the United States. But during those emergency times, that's when the terrestrial network is quite vulnerable. We have a test license, actually, to test this emergency alert system. So a special emergency to talk about here, an ongoing emergency and crisis, is what's happening in Ukraine. We've provided Starlink in Ukraine since the beginning of the conflict. But very recently, we signed a partnership with Kyivstar to help those that do not have access to the Starlink or the broadband capability, and they're connecting people directly from our satellites to their mobile phones. We've been in service for about 2 months. We have over 3 million customers subscribed, and we've sent over 1.2 million SMS messages. We're pleased to be able to support the Ukrainians in both these ways with broadband as well as the the Starlink mobile connectivity, and we're especially pleased with our relationship with the Ukrainian government to help them during this very difficult time. So let's look at the coverage map for Starlink Mobile. We're in 32 countries. We have 35 partners, telecom operator partners, in 6 of the 7 continents. We started, as Mike mentioned earlier, with just text messages, but now we go from text messages, light data, little more data. We're doing voice and video calls now. The service works with your existing LTE phones whenever you're outside. We have 16 million total users connected with 10 million monthly active users. We're working with device manufacturers to improve your experience with our current generation. Mike will talk a little bit about the next generation. And so now you can get WhatsApp on Starlink Mobile. You can talk through Signal. You can get X feeds and the other applications that are available. We will continue to work with the cell phone providers, with our partners, who we basically leverage their spectrum with the Gen 1 system to make your experience even better. So I mentioned we have 35 global partners. T-Mobile was the first in the United States, actually our only partner in the United States. They were the first to sign on, and we've had a great partnership since then. We work with Rogers in Canada. We're about ready to announce a new operator in Mexico. We're with Entel in Chile, a new operator in Costa Rica. In Oceania, we are working with Telstra. They've been an incredible partner. New Zealand, One New Zealand is our partner in New Zealand. If you guys haven't seen their Starlink Mobile video, it's about the zombie apocalypse. It's hilarious. I think it's the best video so far that has Starlink Mobile in it. We're in the Philippines, Japan, KDDI. We actually cover almost the entire population of Japan with Starlink Mobile. KDDI was our first telco partner there, and they have been extraordinary leaning in. We're in the Philippines, we're in Mongolia, we're in Kazakhstan, Switzerland, SALT, UK, VMO2 recently announced. Ukraine, I talked about Kyivstar, and Spain. And in Africa, Airtel is a partner, a very critical partner for us in Africa, and we'll be lighting up 14 countries there, which we are quite proud to talk about having a service capable and helpful for the African people.
So now we're excited to tell you about what's next for Starlink Mobile. The first generation Starlink Mobile constellation was the first ever global direct-to-cell constellation capable of providing text and light data services nearly everywhere in the world, including video calls like we just saw. The second generation constellation, which we'll tell you about here, will deliver broadband capabilities to unmodified cell phones, reaching hundreds of millions, potentially more devices as we scale the constellation. The goal of Starlink Mobile, which will be enabled by the second generation constellation, is to provide a terrestrial-like connectivity when you're connected to the satellite system. So in the right conditions, that's outside, when your phone's in your pocket, when you're in your car and you're connected to Starlink Mobile, it should look and feel like you're connected to a high-performing 5G terrestrial network. That kind of experience is what we're shooting for. How do we enable that? We'll tell you about the satellite and the constellation, but a key factor is the spectrum we're going to use. So our plan is to utilize globally harmonized S-band satellite spectrum. Last year, we acquired S-band spectrum rights in the US, and we'll be able to use that S-band spectrum globally. It has priority ITU rights, which will allow us to scale the constellation globally, subject to regulatory approvals. and offer a consistent level of service everywhere we operate. We're also working closely with device manufacturers and modem manufacturers to enable the service on as many devices as quickly as possible as soon as we launch. So when we launch, which is expected in mid-2027, we will be on most devices in the US. And as Gwynne just talked about, we're already testing new capabilities utilizing the spectrum, like the wireless emergency alerts that we're testing here in Barcelona today. Next, we'll tell you a little bit about how the satellite and the constellation work. So the most critical piece of delivering a high-quality user experience from a satellite to a cell phone is having a really high bandwidth link. On the second-generation satellite, we'll have 20 times the link performance of the first-generation satellite. We accomplished that with a large phased array antenna, 5 times the size of our first-generation satellite, and 4 times the bandwidth per beam. So we'll use 20 by 20 megahertz beams, as well as new capabilities like MIMO on the satellite. We'll also be utilizing the 3GPP NR-NTN standard, 5G NR-NTN, non-terrestrial network standard, which is specifically designed for the satellite to user links, and will enable improved experience, especially when a user is at the edge of a satellite beam, by something like a factor of 10. In ideal conditions, a user could expect to receive download speeds of up to 150 megabits per second, a truly broadband experience. And then the overall capacity of a satellite is actually also very critical. How many users can you support with this great experience? The second-generation satellite will have nearly 100 times the data density of a V1 satellite. Again, we accomplished this with a much larger phased array, which means a smaller spot beam on the ground, and as well as 16 times the number of beams per satellite and other advanced features. The overall satellite throughput will exceed 100 gigabits on download and 50 gigabits on upload, making it comparable in capacity to the Starlink broadband satellites we're launching today. The satellite is critical, but delivering a constellation that has global and contiguous coverage is just as important. So for that, enter SpaceX's new highly performant launch vehicle, Starship, fully reusable launch vehicle. So with Starship, we'll be able to deploy the constellation very quickly. We'll be able to launch more than 50 satellites on every launch, and we'll begin launching in mid-2027. With Starship, we'll be able to deploy the constellation very quickly. Our goal is to deploy a constellation capable of providing global and contiguous coverage within 6 months, and that's roughly 1,200 satellites. From there, we'll continue scaling the constellation to add capacity, much like we scale on the Starlink broadband system. This will allow us to offer data and voice services everywhere. We'll also scale the constellation to cover truly global coverage, including the polar regions. This is incredibly important. The polar regions are some of the areas least covered by terrestrial networks and where satellite can make a real difference. And finally, we'll fly the constellation low, like the first-generation satellite at 350 kilometers. That's, again, to optimize the link between the satellite and the user and for space safety. What's our overall vision here? It's where Starlink Mobile is a key component of a hybrid network that includes terrestrial and satellite capabilities. Satellite is complementary to terrestrial networks. It cannot provide the data density that terrestrial networks have, but it can augment terrestrial networks in the places where terrestrial networks cannot reach or when terrestrial networks need additional capacity. Already with Starlink Broadband, we're connecting cell towers with gigabits of capacity for both primary and backup use case with our mobile partners. This is a capability that's scaling very significantly. And with Starlink Mobile, we'll be utilizing our mid-band spectrum, connecting phones directly beyond the reach of terrestrial networks. And then in addition, this network will have a significant amount of capacity that can be used to augment the terrestrial networks. For example, in Europe, we'll have terabits of capacity over the European continent. We can utilize that capacity to cover the regions where terrestrial networks cannot cover, top of mountains, in the ocean, that kind of thing. But then in addition, we have this amazing capacity that can be used when there's emergency situations, when cell towers go down, or when terrestrial networks need additional capacity dynamically, whether that's for sporting events or people gathering, that kind of thing. And overall, the system may even replace the need to deploy terrestrial networks in certain locations, in the most rural locations.
So we're trying to close the connectivity gap, first with Starlink broadband to homes and other platforms, and now directly to mobile devices. The impact of this technology and the partnerships that we're forging across the globe will only increase to serve more and more humans, helping them have better lives, raise the level of their economy, and ultimately making a better world. We're excited to enable this vision, and we're extremely proud about the partnerships that we have forged with telcos across the globe.
On stage were Gwynne Shotwell and Michael Nichols, the vice president responsible for Starlink engineering and business operations. During the presentation, they introduced the next phase of the Starlink network, including a new push toward direct-to-cell connectivity, which allows satellites to communicate directly with standard smartphones instead of requiring specialized satellite hardware. SpaceX reported that roughly 650 direct-to-cell satellites were already active in orbit. The network had expanded service across 32 countries on 6 continents, and Starlink was seeing about 10 million monthly active users. The company also said it expected that number to grow significantly, with internal projections aiming to exceed 25 million users by the end of 2026.
We've actually connected over 16 million unique users across the constellation and are connecting 10 million active users on a monthly basis. We expect that number to exceed 25 million by the end of 2026.
Shotwell also emphasized how satellite-to-mobile connectivity could help during disasters. In regions where hurricanes, earthquakes, or wildfires destroy traditional infrastructure, a satellite network that connects directly to phones could restore emergency communication within minutes. Shotwell explained that satellite connectivity is no longer a niche capability. It is becoming a core layer of global communications infrastructure, connecting people in places where terrestrial networks cannot reach.
So you can't go live on the moon and Mars without connectivity. So certainly we want to work on connected solutions for there. Unfortunately, there are still almost a third of the people here on planet Earth that remain either unconnected or incredibly underserved. And that's why we started Starlink.
That statement reveals a larger shift in how SpaceX is positioning itself. The company is no longer just selling rocket launches to other organizations. It is building a planetary-scale communications network that operates above every country on Earth. For the average person, the first time they interact with SpaceX will likely not be through rockets or Mars missions. It will be through connectivity. It will be through a phone that suddenly has signal in the middle of an ocean, a desert, or a disaster zone. In other words, most people will encounter SpaceX as a communications company long before they think about it as a space exploration company. And if global connectivity is the visible business that everyone sees, the next question becomes much bigger. What long-term mission is that infrastructure actually supporting? Long before Starlink satellites and mobile connectivity, SpaceX publicly defined its mission as making life multiplanetary. The idea is simple. If humanity exists on more than one world, civilization becomes far more resilient to global catastrophes. Musk wants to make humanity multiplanetary, and to achieve this goal, he is planning to build human cities on Mars. In fact, his company's official Mars page does not describe tourism or exploration. It states the objective clearly: build a self-sustaining city on Mars. But is it really possible?
It's been an incredible year. The SpaceX team, I think, is the best space team that has ever been assembled on the face of the Earth by far. And the achievements of the past year demonstrate that. I think to a degree that is mind-blowing. Like, what you have achieved over the past year is nothing short of incredible. And one day, we will indeed occupy Mars.
At the same time, Starship was already being inserted into the broader exploration roadmap through partnerships with NASA. Under the Artemis program, NASA selected Starship as the human landing system for returning astronauts to the moon. Seen together, these pieces reveal the structure behind SpaceX's strategy. Starlink is the business layer that generates revenue and builds infrastructure around Earth, while Starship is the transportation system designed for a much larger goal. And both of those layers now depend on the same critical piece of technology.
It's important to explain the why of things. And the why of Starship is that we want to be a multi-planet species to extend consciousness beyond Earth, I think for two main reasons. One is to ensure the long-term survival and prosperity of life as we know it in consciousness, which if we are a multi-planet species and ultimately a multi-stellar species out there among the stars, the probability of survival is much, much longer. That's kind of the defensive aspect or life insurance for life collectively. But then there also need to be things that are inspiring and exciting and that give you reason to live. Life cannot just be about solving one tragic problem after another.
Why Starship is the hinge. According to specifications published by SpaceX, Starship is designed to deliver about 150 metric tons to orbit in a reusable configuration and up to roughly 250 metric tons when flown expendably. That scale matters for more than Mars missions. Reporting around the MWC keynote indicated that SpaceX intends to begin launching next-generation Starlink mobile satellites on Starship around mid-2027, dramatically increasing the capacity of the constellation. The larger satellites are expected to launch in batches of around 50 spacecraft per mission, and the long-term goal is to deploy roughly 1,200 satellites within about 6 months to create near-continuous global coverage.
Starlink is the world's largest and most advanced satellite constellation. We're now operating nearly 10,000 satellites in low Earth orbit, providing hundreds of terabits of capacity for broadband services nearly everywhere in the world.
Starship is not just the rocket intended to reach Mars. It is also the launch system that can scale the satellite network, generating revenue for SpaceX. And once a rocket can move enormous payloads to orbit cheaply and frequently, the question changes. The challenge is no longer whether SpaceX can reach orbit. The real question becomes what kind of infrastructure it can build there. The moon is the rehearsal. The first place this new infrastructure will be tested is much closer to Earth. Under NASA's Artemis program, astronauts are scheduled to return to the moon using Starship as the landing vehicle.
NASA says it is revising its Artemis rocket program to return astronauts to the moon by 2028, beating China. The program has suffered several delays, but Artemis 2 is expected to launch in the coming weeks for a lunar flyby. NASA is now adding an additional mission in 2027 called Artemis 3. It will undertake further preparations without actually landing. The U.S. Space Agency hopes its successor mission, Artemis 4, will carry out the final moon landing in early 2028.
Behind the scenes, the system is far more complex than a single launch. An Inspector General report from NASA describes how the mission requires multiple Starship tanker launches, orbital propellant depots, cryogenic fuel transfers in space, and a carefully coordinated sequence of spacecraft operations before the landing system even departs for the moon. The moon program is not simply about planting flags or conducting research. It is a large-scale rehearsal for operating fleets of Starship vehicles and complex logistics chains in space. And once those kinds of operations become routine, concepts like artificial gravity stop sounding like science fiction and start looking like the next engineering step. The gravity clue. This is where the original gravity discussion re-enters the story. In March 2024, Elon Musk posted a short but revealing comment about future Starship missions. He wrote that Starship would have a small spin during the journey to Mars, adding that even a tiny gravity vector would be better than none. The reason that statement matters goes back to the biological challenges of spaceflight. As discussed earlier, microgravity causes bone density loss, muscle deterioration, and vision problems during long missions. If crews are traveling to Mars for months at a time, even a partial gravity environment could help reduce those effects. SpaceX has never officially announced a rotating space station, but the idea of using rotation to generate gravity clearly exists inside the mission planning logic. At first glance, the keynote in Barcelona looked like a telecom presentation about phones and coverage. But when you step back and look at the bigger picture, a different story begins to emerge. SpaceX did not go to Mobile World Congress to unveil a spinning gravity station or announce a futuristic space habitat. What it showed instead was something more fundamental. The company is building infrastructure that operates above the entire planet. Through Starlink, SpaceX is positioning itself as part of the global communications backbone, connecting millions of people across continents and across oceans. But Starlink is only part of the larger strategy. In his latest XAI presentation, Elon Musk made a bold prediction about the moon that could redefine SpaceX's near-term focus and reshape the timeline for lunar infrastructure. If gravity determines how we live in space, the moon may determine where we build first.